A compelling detective story, a cloak and dagger action, and a romantic drama, all these stories were taken from real life. The history of Kazakhstan is inseparable from the world history. Reflections on history, our version.
Laeti, the city of slaves. They somehow did not like each other from the beginning. "Get out of the way," a thin, nondescript man in the clothes of a wanderer said through clenched teeth. The assistant to the bone carver, a boy of about 10 who was just knocked down, did not interfere with anyone on this road. He was generally busy with the business. He was sharpening the elephant figurine, not for sale, but for himself. From Chronicles of the Medieval City. A city that was not on the map for several centuries. It was a quarter for jewelers and a quarter for bone carvers. A city well known to merchants, travelers, and pirates of all types. But the fact that there were no built buildings, even the church, says that it was a craft settlement. A city of slaves and skilled jewelers, Laeti, the so-called Italian cartographers, the ancient city of Aktobe, is what Kazakhstan archaeologists call it. How and by whom was it destroyed? A mystery hidden in the dust of centuries. This is a craft settlement which left no trace in the culture other than the city of Sarayshli. They focus on such a fairly diverse ethnic composition of the population, the same Genoese, so to say, stretch to the pirates of the Genoese.
Because Genoa is a place where there were ships, money, and people who was going around in the world.
Chapter 1. A Scout from Genoa. From Genoa to Laeti, there are about 800 Persian farsak. Apart on the water. From Kafar, it's 3 times less. It's risky, of course, but when you have nothing to risk, why not? He smiled sadly and made a decision. From the Chronicles of the Medieval City. The word pirate has an ancient origin and was known as early as the 4th century BC. Pirate in translation from Latin means trying to reach happiness or a seeker of happiness. But this does not mean that until the 4th century BC pirates did not exist. There's a mention of pirates on ancient Egyptian papyrus dating from the 12th century BC. In the 13th century and early 14th, when the Golden Horde was in full bloom, piracy on the Caspian Sea didn't flourish. Everything was strictly controlled, and robbery was severely punished. But by the middle of the century, the situation had changed. 50 kilometers, it's 2 days to go, and that's it. And already, please, you might get robbed. Power in the Golden Horde passes from one source to another. The time that the Russian chroniclers called the Great Zamyatna, the time of the Horde troubles, well, there was a confusion, expanse for every kind of romantics of a big road, well, or watery surface, the most pirated time in the Caspian region, and 80% of pirates were from overseas. They walked with trade caravans precisely along this path. They descended to the Caspian along the Volga, but this trade route was mastered by the Italians, especially the Genoese. There is such a medieval saying, if you're Genoese, then you're a merchant. But in the 14th century, many merchants went bankrupt. In the middle of the 14th century, the once rich and prosperous city-state of Genoa was also in a political and economic crisis. Many ruined noblemen, small shopkeepers and others didn't mind trying their strength in robbery. A navigator, merchant and pirate, the line between these 3 categories is extremely subtle. A navigator has often become a pirate or a corsair, for example. This is legalized piracy. And just as the merchant rarely became a pirate. However, often the scheme of robbery was as such. The merchant himself did not go on the campaign. He conducted the whole operation, sometimes being very far from the places where it happened. They learned about the places where they went without any resistance. They had a very developed intelligence. With the ships, they tracked the route of movement, found out the military equipment, and took it aboard. With raids on rich cities, the plan was different. The city was not sufficiently protected. Merchants came from all over the world, and the scouts could come along with the merchants. The success of the predatory operations largely depended on the information of spies. There were many merchants and trade agents of different nationalities in the city. A new face didn't arouse much suspicion, like questions about the quality and quantity of goods.
Chapter 2. A City of Prisoners.
A suitable city, thought the unpleasant man in inconspicuous clothes, and gazing with a tenacious look at the jewelry row, and passed by. From the chronicles of the medieval city. Easy prey for pirates and all kinds of robbers. There were no fortress walls or guards, but there were rich resources that could be a profit, or even items for resale. It's a city of artisans. It's not far from Atyrau, the rich golden city of Laeti, on the caravan route from the Lower Volga region to Central Asia. It existed in the 13th and 14th centuries, the city of masters and slaves. However, there's very little left of the city itself. The street was about 1.5 meters wide, so that they could drive through it. The central street divided the city into two parts. On both sides, quarters of masters, jewelers, copper smelters, bone carvers, potters, and gypsum carvers. A small area, not built up by houses. When Galkin dug up pieces, I partially dug up the settlement. This street continued and reached to the end. Moscow archaeologist Lev Galkin, one of the first explorers of this ancient city, was he who found the Italian name on the maps of the Pizzigani brothers. It seems that the famous Venetian cartographers had been here themselves. A craft town, it was called Aktobe, or on Italian maps later it is listed as Laeti. However, what it was called by the townspeople is not known, but it is known that most of its residents were very educated people. Different masters were forced here in the 13th century during the conquest, and then no longer. They themselves came to the feudal turmoil of the 60s and the first half of the 14th century. It was the most prosperous and the richest state, and on the contrary, the craftsmen came to work. They came here themselves to work, as no one forced them to come. It seems to me an interesting find on Aktobe. There's something similar to a lens for a pipe, like the one that was made for observing the stars, and similar. But I'm not saying, it's just my guess. It was made of quartz. Very well made. According to Lev Galkin, the residents of Laeti were well informed about how the world was arranged, in particular, even that the earth revolved around the sun. In the Golden Horde in the early 14th century, there was the poet, As-Sarai. He wrote a poem from which it became clear that the earth revolved around the sun. Long before Copernicus, the rulers and scholars of the Saraichik had recorded many astrological representations. Silicon Valley of the Caspian Middle Ages, one of many. There were a dozen of similar craft settlements in the Golden Horde. Scientists gathered in the so-called Kanaka. These buildings were built in the form of stalls for conversation. The territory of scientists and artisans, many of whom were recently bought slaves or slaves in the second or even the third generation. Having appeared on new lands, they gradually became free. They were invited or captured, sold, bought, to make jewelry here, to develop trade. They were slaves. Yes, slaves. Therefore, the word Laeti in some cases is translated as prisoners. Little is known about the organization of the slave trade in the Golden Horde. Presumably large slave markets existed in large cities such as Sarai Batu, Sarai Berke, and Derbent. Especially popular in the Middle Ages were the Genoese slave markets. Kaffa was a center, or something of a kind, control for the trading operation that were carried out by the Golden Horde with the Genoese. And the slaves were brought from many parts of the world: Poland, Lithuania, Muscovy, Persia, and India.
Chapter 3. A pirate raid. The sun has not yet risen. Water carriers were still asleep. That they pumped water from Jaik, sending it along the archaic system. Noiseless boats sailed to the city, and the soft felt boots the robbers moved almost inaudibly. Whether it was shamelessly round moon or something else incomprehensible and unsettling, it woke up the boy. It was time. The cloudy sky was suddenly illuminated by the glow of an all-consuming flame. From the Chronicles of a Medieval City.
The city existed for only 2 centuries. Approximately the end of the 14th century, all the city residents left. How it happened is still a mystery. It was flooded, and they left. An Atlantis of local scale, the level of the Caspian Sea rose abruptly. The Ural River also changed its course and began to flood the city, and the residents left. This is one of the versions. Another guess is the constant attack of pirates. For some detachment, it was very simple to seize it, because it was not a military city. It was not the capital. It was a city of hard-working people. It was necessary to guess the time when the trade caravans were already assembled, but not yet shipped, because more powerful guards were attached to the caravans. The Golden Horde cities themselves were not guarded. There were almost no fortress walls. Because there were no walls, the cities were scattered very freely. They were not restricted, and they reached huge sizes. And only when the Great Zamyatna began, the war of all against all, they began to set up ramparts and ditches. But the ramparts and ditches were built around the cities where the Khans lived. There were no fortifications in the cities of artisans, so they attacked in a small team, only 2 or 3 dozen people. At first they were fired with burning arrows and bombarded with incendiary bombs. In this, Laeti was also found the wreckage of the bomb, and they were here before. Earlier, something similar had happened in Sarayshik. Here, presumably the remains of the same bomb that the robbers used. A fire broke out, a bustle, and it was possible without much trouble to take a lot of resources. Moreover, in the cities of handicrafts, these were the artisans themselves, an expensive and valuable commodity in the slave market. These robbers, Genoese, Venetians, were not averse to rob cities and take prisoners to sell them on the market. Ostensibly, one of such attacks became fatal for the city. It was simply burned. Most of the inhabitants were driven into slavery. The rest were forced to move closer to Sarayshik, a city richer and more fortified. However, there is another assumption. Laeti was destroyed by the troops of Tamerlane, who finally defeated the remnants of the Golden Horde. Cities in the Golden Horde died when the state died. When the Golden Horde fell apart, its cities ceased to exist.
Epilogue, an untold story. The boy was huddled in the corner and didn't cry. There were no tears. He smelled of burning, and he was already not afraid what was happening for him ahead. The main thing was that he was alive. Only he'd lost his elephant somewhere. It's nothing. He'll make another one. From the Chronicles of the Medieval City.
Here is a baby elephant from there. A small gypsum baby elephant made by an unknown master. When I found an elephant, I thought it was not a local one, but the one that long ago longed for home.
а тот, который давно-давно тосковал по родине.
The mysterious story of the death of the Golden Horde and the city with the Italian name Laeti, as yet unwritten.